"Offer him the educated one," my stepmother said. Her voice, a low hiss of strategic venom, meant only for my father's ear. Her fan, a confection of lace and painted silk, fluttered to obscure the words from any nearby listeners, but I heard them. I always heard. From my designated corner near the tall, drafty window, I had become an expert in the acoustics of cruelty. The words were a familiar blade, sharpened over years of similar remarks. The educated one. It was not a compliment. In Lady Anya's world, it was a brand, a mark of unsaleable goods. It meant I was plain, quiet, and possessed a mind that was not only useless in the glittering ballroom of the season, but actively detrimental. A mind was not a marketable asset for a young woman. A pretty face, a charming laugh, a talent for flattering powerful men, those were the currency of our world. My stepsister, Serafina, was rich in all three. I was bankrupt. My father, Lord Valerius, flinched. A weak, tired man, he was a vessel filled only with the desire for peace, and Anya's constant scheming was the storm that forever tossed his little ship. He made a soft, placating noise, a sound I knew well. It was the sound of my abandonment, the quiet, polite surrender he performed daily. He would not defend me. He never did. Anya's gaze flickered to me, her eyes like chips of ice. Someone must take her. Any port in a storm, Valerius. If the old Baron Hemlock is feeling sentimental, perhaps he'll take pity. But the Duke requires perfection. Her eyes swept lovingly over Serafina, who stood radiant near the ballroom center. Serafina was the sun around which our small, desperate family revolved. Her gown was a cascade of starlit silver, her laughter the chiming of tiny bells. She was not cruel, not in the way Anya was. Her flaw was a simpler one, a profound, unbreachable ignorance of any suffering that did not touch her directly. She saw me in my somber gray dress, half hidden by a velvet curtain, and likely thought I was content. She believed, as she had been taught, that I preferred the shadows. She did not understand that the shadows had been assigned to me. Tonight was the pinnacle of the season, the Blackwood Ball, hosted at the formidable manor of the Duke of Alastair. It was an event of such magnitude that to be absent was to be socially deceased. Anya had spent a fortune on Serafina's gown, a fortune I knew we did not have. My own dress was a relic, dyed a mousy gray to render me as unobtrusive as possible. The color of invisibility. That was my uniform. My designated humiliation for the evening was this small, cold alcove. I was to remain here, a book held in my lap as a prop of my own strangeness, and be utterly silent. I was a piece of set dressing, a quiet testament to Anya's misfortune at having inherited a daughter so thoroughly unsuited for the marriage market. I was the before, and Serafina was the glorious after. The great doors of the ballroom swung open, and a hush fell over the chattering assembly. It was a silence so sudden and profound it felt like a physical force pressing the air from my lungs. I leaned forward slightly, peering around the edge of the curtain. He had arrived. The Duke of Alastair. Kalen. A man spoken of only in whispers, a figure of mythic power and wealth. He was reclusive, severe, and, since the tragic death of his younger brother years ago, perpetually in mourning. He rarely appeared in society, and when he did, his presence altered the very atmosphere of a room. He was tall, dressed in immaculate black that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was all sharp angles and stark planes, handsome in a way that was unsettling, like a statue carved from granite and grief. There was no softness in him. Anya's hand tightened on my father's arm. This was the moment she had engineered our lives for. The Duke was the ultimate prize, a man whose title could wash away our debts and secure our family's position for generations. Serafina was the bait. She had been coached for weeks, her every smile and curtsy rehearsed to perfection. The Duke's gaze swept the room. It was not a casual glance. It was an assessment, cool and discerning. He acknowledged a few of the more prominent ministers with a curt nod, his expression unreadable. Every hopeful mother and ambitious father held their breath. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, moved past glittering diamonds and silken gowns, past practice smiles and fluttering fans. He saw it all. I knew he did. He saw Anya's predatory eagerness, my father's nervous fidgeting. He saw Serafina, poised like a beautiful, waiting doll. And then his gaze kept moving. It drifted past the orchestra, past the groaning banquet tables, and settled with an unnerving stillness on the far corner of the room. On me. For a heart-stopping second, I was certain I was mistaken. He was surely looking at the tapestry behind me, or the pattern of moonlight on the floor. But his focus did not waver. He was looking directly at me, the girl in the gray dress, the forgotten footnote in the grand story of the night. I felt a hot flush of panic and shrank further behind the curtain, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Anya, sensing her moment, began to steer my father and a beaming Serafina in the Duke's direction. "Your Grace," she began, her voice dripping with saccharine reverence. "What an honor! May I present my daughter, Serafina?" Serafina executed a flawless curtsy, a dip of silver and grace. The Duke did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on my alcove. And then he did the most inexplicable, most disruptive thing imaginable. He moved. He began to walk, not toward Anya and her perfect daughter, but directly across the vast polished floor, toward the window, toward me. A wave of shocked whispers followed in his wake. He cut through the crowd like a ship's prow through water, his path direct and absolute. Anya's smile froze, cracking at the edges. Serafina's head came up, confusion clouding her lovely face. My father looked as if he might faint. I could not breathe. My world, once so predictably small and gray, had suddenly tilted on its axis. He was coming closer. The scent of winter air and clean linen clung to him. He stopped a mere 2 feet from my hiding place, the sheer force of his presence a palpable thing. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and resonant, a quiet sound that carried with impossible clarity in the stunned silence. He did not address Anya. He did not acknowledge Serafina. He looked directly at me, his severe face impassive, and he spoke. "Vitruvius," he said. I stared at him, my mind a complete blank. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod toward the book in my hands. "You are reading Vitruvius, an unusual choice for a ballroom." My throat was dry. I could only manage a faint, shaky nod. The book was indeed a collection of essays on classical architecture, my secret solace. I had brought it, assuming no one would ever be close enough to read the title. "Most find his theories on symmetry rather dry," he continued, his tone conversational, as if we were the only 2 people in the room. "I've always found his insistence on the connection between architectural proportion and the human form to be fundamental. Do you agree, miss?" He paused, waiting. My name was a forgotten thing on my tongue. "Ilara," I whispered, the sound swallowed by the cavernous room. "Ilara Vance." "Miss Vance." He said my name as if it were a solid, respectable thing, not the whisper I had always known it to be. "Do you agree?" Behind him, I could see Anya's face, a mask of pure, murderous fury. The social order had been upended. The Duke had ignored the sun and sought out the shadow. And he was asking me a question about architectural theory. It was madness. It was a dream. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I found a sliver of my voice. I believe his principles are not merely about aesthetics," I managed, my words thin but clear. "They are about creating spaces that are in harmony with the people who inhabit them. It's a form of structural empathy." A flicker of something, interest, surprise, crossed his features. It was there and gone in an instant. "Structural empathy," he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. "An interesting phrase." He stood there for another long moment, simply observing me. The silence stretched, becoming a spectacle in itself. Then, with a final curt nod, he turned and walked away, leaving me in the wreckage of his wake. He did not speak to another soul. He strode to the great doors and was gone. The ballroom erupted in a frenzied buzz of speculation. But I heard none of it. I was still trapped in the echo of his voice, in the impossible reality of what had just happened. The most powerful man in the kingdom had seen me, and he had not seen a plain, educated girl. He had seen a reader of Vitruvius. He had seen me. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid not of being invisible, but of what it might mean to be seen. The journey home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Anya's rage was a palpable entity in the carriage, a cold, sharp thing that made the air feel thin. She did not speak to me, did not even look at me. Her fury was directed at my father, who withered under its force. Serafina, for her part, was merely bewildered. The night had not unfolded according to the script, and she had no lines for this new, confusing play. I retreated into myself, replaying the scene at the window over and over. His eyes, the color of a winter storm. His voice, calm and deep. Structural empathy. The words I had spoken felt foreign, brave. Who was that girl? She was not the Alara I knew. The Alara I knew was a creature of silence and gray wool, of quiet corners and lowered eyes. Hope, I reminded myself, was a fool's game. I had learned that lesson early and painfully. The Duke's attention was a whim, a passing strangeness. He was a man of immense power, known for his eccentricities. Perhaps singling out the most insignificant person in the room was a private amusement, a way to disrupt the cloying social rituals he so clearly disdained. Tomorrow, he would have forgotten my name. Tomorrow, I would be back in my designated shadow, and the brief, blinding spotlight would be nothing but a strange memory. I clung to this certainty like a shield. It was safer to expect nothing. It was safer to remain invisible. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It was delivered by a footman in the Duke of Alistair's livery, a crisp black and silver that stood out against the peeling paint of our townhouse door. The envelope was thick, creamy parchment, sealed with a formidable wax sigil, and it was addressed in a stark, elegant hand to Miss Alara Vance. Anya snatched it from the salver before I could even rise from my chair in the morning room. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, fury, avarice, and raw, untempered jealousy. She scanned the contents, her breath catching. "He invites you to Blackwood Manor," she said, her voice a strangled whisper, "to view the North Gallery. He says he is considering renovations and he values your singular perspective on classical design." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She stared at me, her eyes narrowed. "What game is this, Alara? What did you do?" "I did nothing," I said, my own voice barely audible. My heart had begun a slow, heavy drumming against my ribs. "You bewitched him," she hissed, "with your strange books and your quiet, unnatural ways. You have ruined everything." "Anya, please," my father murmured, looking up from his newspaper with a pained expression. "It is an invitation from the Duke. She cannot refuse." "She will be chaperoned, of course," Anya snapped, her mind already racing, recalculating. "I will accompany her. I will not have her filling his head with more nonsense, unsupervised." But the note was quite specific. "I have asked my housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to attend you." He had anticipated her. He had, with a simple line of ink, barred her from his home. The knowledge set a terrifying, thrilling shiver through me. The day of the visit arrived cloaked in a fine gray mist. Blackwood Manor loomed out of the fog like a mountain, a formidable edifice of dark stone and towering spires. It was not a welcoming place. It was a fortress, built to command and to endure. As the carriage rolled to a stop, I felt a tremor of pure fear. What was I doing here? I was a mouse invited into a lion's den. I was met at the door not by the Duke, but by a woman as stern and unyielding as the manor itself. Mrs. Gable was tall and severe, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes, however, were sharp and observant, and they held no judgment as they took in my simple, mended dress. "Miss Vance," she said, her voice crisp. "His Grace is in the library. He will join you in the gallery shortly. This way." She led me through halls that echoed with silence and history. Portraits of grim-faced ancestors watched me pass. The air was cool and smelled of beeswax and old stone. But when she opened the doors to the library, I stopped breathing. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. It was not a room, it was a cathedral dedicated to the written word. Books soared to a vaulted ceiling, lining galleries connected by spiral staircases of dark, polished iron. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting a warm, golden glow over thousands of leather-bound spines. In the center of the room, a massive table was covered in star charts and architectural drawings. This was not a dilettante's collection. This was the sanctuary of a true scholar. "His Grace will be with you presently," Mrs. Gable repeated, and then she was gone, leaving me alone in the heart of his world. I did not dare touch anything. I stood just inside the doorway, feeling small and utterly out of place. This was his soul, this room. A place of order, knowledge, and profound solitude. And he had invited me into it. "Do you approve?" His voice came from the upper gallery. I started, looking up to see him standing there, leaning on the iron railing. He was not in formal attire, but in a simple white shirt and dark trousers. Without the stiff coat, he looked younger, less imposing, but no less intense. "It is magnificent," I stammered. He descended one of the spiral staircases, his movements fluid and silent. "It is my refuge," he said, stopping a few feet from me, "from the obligations of the title and the noise of the world." His eyes held mine. "I imagine you understand the need for such a place." It was not a question, but a statement of fact. He saw my quiet corners and drafty alcoves not as a punishment, but as a necessity. He understood. The realization was so profound, so startling, that I felt a dizzying wave of emotion. "The North Gallery is this way," he said, gesturing. "But first." He walked to the great table and picked up a slim, leather-bound volume. He held it out to me. "I believe this is yours." I looked at the cover. It was a journal. My journal. The one I had lost months ago, the one filled with my private thoughts, my architectural sketches, my essays written under the pseudonym A. Credo. My blood ran cold. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I purchased it from a bookseller in the city," he explained, his tone even. He had acquired a small lot from an estate sale. The name Vance was on the ledger. I confess, I recognized the handwriting. He tapped the cover. The essay on the resonant frequencies of cathedral naves was particularly insightful. A. Credo has a formidable mind. He knew. He had known all along. His attention was not a whim. It was not pity. He had sought me out not because of a passing comment in a ballroom, but because he had read my secret thoughts, the workings of my mind, and had found them worthy. "You knew who I was," I said, the accusation soft. "I knew the author," he corrected gently. "I did not know the woman." "I saw you at the Liston lecture 2 years ago. You asked a question about the structural integrity of the old aqueducts that the speaker dismissed out of hand. I remember thinking it was the only intelligent question asked all afternoon." He paused. "And then, at the ball, I saw you again, hidden away, silenced, and I found I could not tolerate the discrepancy." I stared at him, my carefully constructed defenses crumbling to dust. He was not playing a game. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was telling me the truth. He saw the person I kept hidden from the world, the person I myself had begun to believe did not truly exist. As I stood there, speechless, he noticed the slight tremor in my hands. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "You are cold," he stated. He turned and spoke to the empty air. "Gable, a shawl for Miss Vance, and tea, the Ceylon blend." I started. I had mentioned my preference for Ceylon tea once, in passing, to Serafina weeks ago. A detail so trivial, so meaningless. But he had heard it, or he had made it his business to know it. Mrs. Gable appeared as if from nowhere, a soft cashmere shawl in her hands. She draped it over my shoulders. It was warm and smelled faintly of lavender. The small, practical act of kindness was more disarming than any grand gesture. It was an act of care, an act of seeing. I clutched the shawl and the journal, my 2 shields, and followed him out of the library. Hope was no longer a fool's game. It was a terrifying, brilliant, and unavoidable dawn breaking over the long night of my life. Our visits became a quiet ritual, a series of fragile truces with the loud, demanding world outside his gates. We walked the formal gardens, where the very hedges seemed to obey his will, clipped into precise geometric forms. He would point out the mathematical progression in the fern's fronds, or the golden ratio in the spiral of a snail's shell. And I would find myself speaking not in whispers, but in full, confident sentences about the patterns that governed the universe. We were not courting, not in any conventional sense. We were conversing. We were building a bridge between two solitary islands, a bridge made of shared thoughts and quiet understanding. One afternoon, he took me to the west wing of the manor, a section that was closed to visitors. It was dustier here, the portraits draped in white cloth like silent ghosts. He stopped before one, larger than the rest, and pulled back the sheet. It was a portrait of two boys. One was unmistakably a younger Kalen, his face already serious, his gaze intense. The other was a boy with a bright, mischievous smile and hair the color of spun gold. "My brother," Kalen said, his voice losing its usual precise edge, becoming rougher, heavier. "Leo." I remained silent, knowing this was a sacred space he was allowing me to enter. "He was everything I was not," he continued, his eyes fixed on the painting. Full of light. He loved horses, the wind, the feel of living at a gallop. I preferred the quiet of the library. I told him the stallion he favored was too spirited, too unpredictable. I warned him. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He laughed, said I worried too much. The next day, he was thrown. The fall. He did not need to finish the sentence. The story was etched on his face, in the permanent winter of his expression. "I was the older brother. It was my duty to protect him," he said, the words stark and bare. I failed. After he was gone, the noise of the world became unbearable. The meaningless chatter, the condolences from people who felt nothing. The solitude was not a choice, it was a necessity, a penance. This was the source of his famous severity, the root of his reclusion. Not arrogance, but a grief so profound it had hollowed him out, leaving only duty and silence behind. My heart ached for the serious boy in the portrait who had lost his light. Impulsively, without thinking, I reached out and laid my hand on his arm. It was a shocking breach of propriety, a touch that crossed an invisible, charged line. His arm was tense beneath the fine wool of his coat, hard as stone. He did not pull away. He simply went still, his gaze dropping from the portrait to my hand. "It was not your fault," I said softly. The words were simple, inadequate, but they were the only truth I could offer. You cannot command the wind, or the spirit of a horse, or the heart of a boy who loves to gallop. You loved him. That was your duty, and you did not fail in it. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. His eyes, usually so guarded, were clear and deep, and in them I saw a flicker of something raw and vulnerable. He looked at me as if I had just handed him a key to a room he had long since sealed shut. He did not speak, but he lifted his own hand and gently, tentatively, covered mine. His fingers were long and cool, the touch sending a jolt of warmth through my entire body. We stood there for a long moment, bound by that single point of contact, the silence in the dusty gallery more intimate than any conversation. The world outside Blackwood's gates, however, had not been silent. Anya's fury had been simmering, curdling into a venomous resolve. She saw my quiet visits not as the intellectual communion they were, but as a direct assault on her ambitions. I, the educated one, the plain one, was poaching her prize. It was an intolerable inversion of the natural order she had worked so hard to establish. Her first move was to forbid me from returning to the manor. "You will not see him again," she declared one morning, her voice flat and final. "This foolishness ends now." "It is an invitation from the Duke," my father protested weakly, though he would not meet my eyes. To refuse would be a grave insult. "A greater insult is having this bookish spinster make a fool of our family," she spat. "I will not be forbidden," I said. The voice was mine, but the strength in it was new, forged in the quiet respect of Kalen's library. "His Grace has requested my consultation on the gallery renovations." I will not be rude." Anya stared at me, momentarily stunned by my defiance. It was the first time I had ever openly contradicted her. The battle lines were drawn. And she, a master of social warfare, was not about to lose to a raw recruit. If she could not forbid me, she would destroy me. A week later, as I was preparing for my next visit to Blackwood, my father entered my room. He looked older, more stooped than ever. He wrung his hands, his face a mask of misery. "Ilara," he began, his voice cracking. She has made an arrangement." "An arrangement?" I asked, a cold dread seeping into my bones. "Your cousin, Lord Fenwick. He has asked for your hand. Anya has accepted on your behalf. The wedding is to be in a fortnight." Lord Fenwick. A boorish man twice my age, with a reputation for drink and a cruel temper. He was a brute, a man who would see my mind not as an asset, but as an impertinence to be beaten out of me. It was a life sentence. It was a cage from which there would be no escape. "No," I whispered. "No, you cannot." "I have no choice," he cried, his weakness finally erupting into a pathetic display of desperation. "She says it is this, or she will reveal things. About your mother's finances, about debts I have incurred. She will ruin us all, Ilara. This is the only way to keep the peace." To keep his peace. I was the sacrifice laid upon the altar of his cowardice. The last vestiges of my childish affection for him curdled into cold, hard pity. He was not a father. He was just a man afraid of a storm. But Anya's strategy was twofold. A forced marriage was not enough. She had to ensure the Duke would cast me aside with disgust. That same afternoon, I saw her at her writing desk, a sly, triumphant smile on her face. She was composing a letter, her pen scratching across the page like an insect's leg. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the marrow, who that letter was for. She was poisoning the well. She was sending her lies to Blackwood Manor. I was trapped. Anya had built a prison around me, its walls made of social convention, financial blackmail, and a forced betrothal. Hope, which had so recently bloomed, was being systematically uprooted. I felt myself sinking back into the gray fog, the silence descending once more. I had been a fool to think a few shared books and quiet conversations could change the fundamental structure of my world. Anya was the architect of my life, and she was building me a tomb. The Duke's response was not what I, in my despair, had anticipated. I expected silence. I expected a cold, formal note severing all ties. I expected him to retreat back into his fortress of solitude, disgusted by the sordid drama of my family. I had underestimated him. I had underestimated Kalen. He did not write back. He acted. 2 days after Anya sent her venomous letter, a carriage bearing the Duke's crest arrived at our door. It was not an invitation. It was a summons, a formal, non-negotiable request for the presence of Lord Valerius, Lady Anya, and Miss Ilara Vance at Blackwood Manor that afternoon. The note made no mention of Seraphina, a deliberate and cutting omission. Anya was triumphant. "You see," she crowed, waving the note. "He has received my letter. He wishes to dissolve his acquaintance with you formally. He will commend me for my honesty in saving him from a disastrous entanglement." She was practically giddy with her perceived victory, preening as she chose her most imperious gown. I felt nothing but a hollow dread. This was it, the final humiliation. I would be denounced in front of my tormentor, my brief flight ending in a spectacular crash. I dressed in my usual gray, the color of resignation, feeling like a prisoner being led to her own execution. We were shown not to the comfortable drawing room, but to the library. His library. Kalen was standing by the great fireplace, his back to us, staring into the flames. The air in the room was tense, heavy. He was dressed in severe black, the Duke of Alastair in his full, intimidating glory. Mrs. Gable stood silently by the door, her presence that of a loyal sentinel. "Your Grace," Anya began, sweeping into the room. "We came as soon as we received your summons. I am so glad you have seen reason regarding the delicate matter I wrote to you about." Kalen turned slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes like chips of ice. The sheer, controlled rage emanating from him was so potent that Anya's simpering smile faltered. My father shrank back, looking for a corner to disappear into. "Reason," Kalen said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Let us speak of reason, Lady Anya." He gestured to the massive table. Upon it were two documents. One was her letter, its spidery script looking venomous even from a distance. The other was a thick sheaf of legal papers, tied with a ribbon. "You wrote to me," he continued, his voice slicing through the silence, claiming that Miss Vance was of an unstable mind, that she was secretly promised to another, that she was a liability you were attempting, out of the goodness of your heart, to manage. He picked up her letter, holding it between two fingers as if it were something contaminated. "You lied." Anya paled. "I did no such thing. I wrote as a concerned mother." "You wrote as a thief and a fraud," Kalen cut in, his voice unwavering. He tapped the second document. "Upon receiving your cautionary tale, I had my solicitors make some inquiries into your family's finances, specifically into the dowry and inheritance left to Miss Vance by her mother, the late Lady Eleanor." My father made a small, strangled sound. "It seems," Kalen went on, his eyes boring into Anya, "that Lady Eleanor's entire fortune, a considerable one, was placed in a trust for her daughter, to be administered by her father until her marriage. A trust you have been systematically plundering for the last 10 years to fund your social ambitions and to lavish on your own daughter. You have spent Miss Vance's inheritance, Lady Anya, every last penny." The revelation hung in the air, stunning and monstrous. Anya's face crumpled, her mask of gentility shattering to reveal the raw, grasping greed beneath. "Lies! Slander!" she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "Facts," Kalen corrected, his calm a terrifying counterpoint to her hysteria. "My solicitors have the bank records, the forged signatures, the receipts for gowns and jewels and gambling debts, all paid for with money that was not yours. You did not want to see Miss Vance married to me because a duchess has power. A duchess has access to lawyers and financial advisors who would have uncovered your decade of theft in a single afternoon. Your arrangement with Lord Fenwick was not to save her reputation. It was to bury her and your crimes in a remote, powerless marriage where she could never challenge you. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the entire structure of my life, of Anya's power. I looked at my father, who was weeping openly now, a pathetic, broken man. I looked at Anya, whose face was contorted with a frantic, cornered hatred. And then I looked at Kalen. He stood tall and unyielding, a bulwark of truth in a sea of lies. He had not believed her. For 1 second, he had trusted me, the quiet girl in the corner, over the honeyed words of a practiced liar. And he had brought her deception crashing down around her. Empowered by his unshakable defense, a lifetime of silence broke inside me. I took a step forward. All eyes turned to me. "You called me the educated one," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the charged room. I was speaking to Anya, but also to myself, to the girl I used to be. "You used it like a curse. You told me my mind was a flaw, something to be hidden. You told me I was worthless because I did not glitter, because I did not charm, because I preferred the company of books to the company of fools." I took another step. "But my mind is not a flaw. It is who I am. My education was not a burden. It was my only escape from the prison you built for me. A prison of whispers and insults and constant grinding dismissal. You tried to make me invisible, to erase me. You stole my mother's memory, you stole my inheritance, and you tried to steal my future." I was standing before her now, no longer shrinking, no longer afraid. "But you have failed. I am not invisible, and I am not worthless." I looked from her ruined face to my father's tear-streaked one. "And I will not be sold to keep your peace." Anya lunged, not at me, but at the legal documents on the table, her hands like claws. "You will not ruin me, you wretched, ungrateful girl," she screamed. But Mrs. Gable was faster. With a strength that belied her age, she caught Anya's arms, holding her fast. "That is enough, my lady," the housekeeper said, her voice firm. The fight went out of Anya all at once. She sagged in Mrs. Gable's grip, defeated. Her social ambition, her power, her entire world, all of it had been built on a foundation of lies and theft, and Kaylin had just kicked it out from under her. She was ruined. Just then, the library doors opened, and Serafina stood there. She had clearly been waiting outside, drawn by the raised voices. She took in the scene, Anya restrained, our father weeping, me standing defiant, and the Duke, a figure of judgment, and her beautiful face filled with a dawning, horrified understanding. Her gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw not ignorance, but shame and empathy. "Elara," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "I am so sorry. I never knew." Kaylin spoke one last time, his voice resonating with absolute authority. "Lord Valerius," he said, "you will see to it that Lady Anya is removed from your house and from society. You will begin legal proceedings to restore what you can of your daughter's stolen inheritance. If you fail to do either, I will personally see you charged as an accessory to her crimes." He paused. "Now, I suggest you all leave my home." My father, trembling, helped a now limp Anya from the room. Serafina gave me one last anguished look before following them out. The great oak doors closed behind them, shutting out a lifetime of misery. And then we were alone. The silence that descended was not tense or heavy, but vast and clean, like the quiet after a storm has finally passed. The sheer emotional force of the confrontation left me shaking, my newfound strength evaporating into a flood of delayed shock and overwhelming relief. A sob escaped me, then another. I wept, not for the family I had lost, for in truth, I had never had one. I wept for the girl who had endured so much, who had believed herself to be nothing. I wept because the war was finally over. Kaylin did not move immediately. He allowed me the dignity of my tears, his presence a quiet, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. When my sobs finally subsided into ragged breaths, he crossed the space between us. He did not offer platitudes or pity. He simply took a handkerchief from his pocket, plain, white linen, and handed it to me. I took it, my fingers brushing his. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick. For everything. For believing me." "There was nothing to believe, Elara," he said, his voice softer now, the hard edge of command gone completely. "There was only the truth. I have spent my life surrounded by artifice and ambition. I recognize truth when I see it. I recognized it in you from the very first." He led me to one of the leather armchairs by the fire, and I sank into it, exhausted. He remained standing, looking down at me, the firelight catching the sharp planes of his face, warming the granite. "I did not do this to rescue you," he said, his gaze direct and serious. "You are not a damsel in a fairy tale, and I am no white knight. I did this because I cannot abide injustice, and because the thought of your mind, that brilliant singular mind, being locked away and silenced by a brute like Fenwick was intolerable." He knelt before my chair, an astonishing gesture that brought him to my level. He took my hands in his. They were no longer trembling. "I have spent years in a prison of my own making, Elara, a fortress of grief and solitude. And then I read your words. I saw you. And for the first time in a very long time, a window opened. You let the light in. My heart, which had been through so much, seemed to swell in my chest, full to bursting. I am not a man for poetic speeches," he continued, a faint wry smile touching his lips. "My world is one of facts, structures, and foundations. And the simple fact is this: my life is a better, more profound structure with you in it. I do not want to be your rescuer. I want to be your partner. I want to build a life with you, a life of shared thoughts and quiet conversation, of mutual respect and discovery. I want to see you, Elara Vance, every day for the rest of my days." He took a breath, his grip on my hands tightening. "Will you marry me?" His proposal was not about saving me. It was about joining me. It was not about my beauty or my station, but about my mind, myself, the very essence of the person I was. He was not offering me a title as a prize. He was offering me a partnership as an equal. Tears welled in my eyes again, but this time they were tears of profound, unutterable joy. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, Kalen, yes." His face transformed. The severity melted away, replaced by a look of such profound relief and gentle happiness that it took my breath away. He leaned forward, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a fiery, passionate explosion. It was something far deeper, far more significant. It was a promise. It was a homecoming. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock you never knew existed. It was quiet. It was certain. And it was the end of a very long winter. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of the West Wing at Blackwood Manor, a set of architectural drawings held in my hands. The air was crisp with the scent of autumn, and below me, the gardens were a tapestry of gold and crimson. The renovations were nearly complete, my renovations. A pair of strong arms wrapped around my waist from behind, and a familiar chin rested on my shoulder. "The buttresses are holding, Your Grace?" Kalen's voice was a low murmur in my ear, laced with a familiar, private amusement. "Perfectly, Your Grace," I replied, leaning back against the solid warmth of him. I was the Duchess of Alastair now, a title that had once seemed as impossibly distant as the moon. But in the quiet reality of our life together, it was just a word. The truth of my new existence was here, in his arms, in the shared language of our days. Our life was not a whirlwind of society balls and grand events. It was a thing of quiet purpose. It was evenings in the library, debating philosophy until the fire burned low. It was him listening, rapt, as I explained my designs for the new orphanage we were funding in the city. An institution built not just as a shelter, but as a space of structural empathy, designed to nurture and protect. It was the easy silence between us, a silence no longer born of loneliness, but of perfect companionship. Serafina had visited last month, her husband, a kind-hearted country gentleman, in tow. Her apology had been sincere, and a tentative friendship, fragile but real, was beginning to grow between us. My father lived quietly on a small, remote estate, a man forever haunted by his own weakness. Anya had disappeared, banished to some distant continent, her name a forgotten whisper in the world she had so desperately tried to conquer. Kalen turned me in his arms, his stormy eyes soft in the afternoon light. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with my finger. "I was thinking about a girl in a gray dress," I said softly, "standing in a corner, hiding behind a book." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles. "I wasn't," he said. "I was thinking about the woman who taught me that the strongest foundations are not made of stone, but of trust, and that the most beautiful light is the one that comes from being truly seen." He was right. I was no longer that girl. The world had tried to make me invisible, a footnote in someone else's story, but love, true and discerning, had found me in the shadows. It had not rescued me, it had given me the strength to rescue myself, to step out of the corner and into the sun, to claim my own voice, my own mind, and my own happily ever after. I was Alara, Duchess of Alastair. I was a wife, a partner, an architect. I was educated, and I was, finally and completely, seen.